Hello, and welcome to the Business Expo Learning Stage. We're excited to have you join us today, and we want to encourage you to ask any questions you may have during our next presentation. You may do so by using the chat button today rather than the Q&A button located on the right-hand side of your screen. All questions will be answered at the end of the webinar today. Also, a friendly reminder that this webinar will be recorded and posted to our Traverse Connect YouTube page within 24 hours. Our first speaker is Ellie Hudson, who will be presenting Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, and Gen Z, multi-generational teams in the modern workplace. Ellie Hudson is an organizational development consultant based in Traverse City who specializes in helping companies and professionals in their pursuit of excellence. Her focus areas cover a cross-section of strategic planning, sustainability, diversity and inclusion, analytics, and more, with emphasis on multicultural teams and developing strategies on how diverse teams work and thrive together. Ellie became interested in generational transition while leading programs for a large trade association and seeing millennials taking leadership roles and how it changed team dynamics in specific ways. A curiosity which eventually turned into completion of a master's degree in organizational development and leadership. Outside of her professional roles, she can be found kayaking, swimming, and hiking with her family, including husband Dave, one-year-old daughter, and their very entertaining family dog, Ted. Welcome, Ellie.
Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Traverse Connect, and to presenting sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. And I'm glad that you mentioned Ted because, you know, in these work from home times, Ted might make an appearance, usually via sound. So now you know what to expect. Welcome, everyone. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the multi-generational workplace and workplace generational transition. For the first time in modern workplace, we have a very common occurrence of 4 generations or even sometimes 5. This is kind of the first time in history that this has happened. When we say at least 4 and sometimes 5, the youngest generation, you've probably heard of Gen Z. The oldest generation in the workplace are called traditionalists. Sometimes this is also called the greatest generation. And we're going to go into this in detail in just a minute. But I wanted to just kind of point out the sort of basic of what we're looking at. And sometimes there's a little bit of overlap. But really, there is also another perspective that I think is worth mentioning, which is it just 2 generations in the workplace? And if it's just 2 generations, and I listed 4 or sometimes 5, you know, what are the 2 generations? And I have to give credit to Jeff Havens, who's an author that made this argument really popular. The idea is that the 2 generations, does anyone want to guess? You can put a guess in the chat window. I won't be able to see it, but if you're willing to guess what the 2 generations are. Old people and young people, right? Or put another way, us and them. And this is an important point to, I think, really consider in that we all are members of a generation. We tend to work with people who are not our exact same age. So even if it's just 2 generations and we're thinking about old people and young people, and sometimes it feels like us and them. People who are like me are us, and people who are different are them. All right, so kind of building on this, I want to encourage you to kind of participate in this exercise. So if you have a little piece of scrap paper, or even if you just imagine in your mind, think of the people in your life that you trust the most. So this can be at your workplace or your friends. Please try to avoid family members. So don't think about your family, your closest friends, your most trusted confidants, those people at work, the people who overlap and are those close friends at work. This exercise was made popular by a diversity consultant called Scott Horton, and he calls this the trusted 10. So I'm going to kind of walk you through it now that you've had a couple minutes, maybe a minute or so to think about your trusted 10. So I actually went with 20, my trusted 10 in my personal life and my trusted 10 at work. So who do you trust? So here's my 2 versions of trusted 10. The top photo are my trusted girlfriends. This was this photo is a couple years old, but these are the people that if you say to me, Ellie, who do you trust outside of your family? These are the people. The bottom photo is a group of colleagues from work. And so just a little bit about, this is my honest attempt at this exercise. So there's 21 people in the two photos. 2 of them are me, so let's take that out. One of them is my sister, so we take her out. So that's 18 people among these 2 photos. Only one of these people is more than 10 years younger than me. Only 2 of them are more than 10 years older. And just as a case in point, one of them is the Icelandic woman holding a beer in the bottom workplace photo. So just kind of worth pointing out. So getting even closer to the kind of core of this, 10 of these 18 people are within 3 years of my age. So over half. And probably most notably, the average age of the 18 people is within less than a year. It's about 8 months of my age in either direction. So what does that tell us? This is my home life and my workplace. In this case, they don't intersect at all. Although I know that's not true always, and it's not true of everyone. This is what Scott Horton calls the like me bias. And this is something that's important to, as a good starting point for any type of diversity and inclusion, including generational transition. What he cautions against is this idea that if we tend to trust people who are like me, what might we be tempted to do when we are presented with a difficult or high impact problem to solve at work? We'd probably want the people we trust the most to be working with us. And if we tend to trust people who are most like us, what this does over time is it perpetuates the status quo. And so it's interesting to think, if I have a project and I'm trusting people, what if you're on the outside looking in? What if the people who have the interesting projects are not like you? And it's going to be harder to be considered for part of these exercises. And so just with anything in diversity and inclusion, it's important to kind of recognize this. We like to think of ourselves as overcoming bias. I know I work really hard at that, and I'm assuming and guessing that most people on this presentation do too. I heard recently, as part of working on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for Traverse Connect, one of our guest speakers said, if you have a brain, you have bias. And that I thought was really impactful, not just in the sense of, reminding me that I still do have work to do no matter what, but also considering the alternative. If I'm saying I'm not biased, what am I really saying about myself? So I really encourage you to take this interest in the bias that you might have looking at across generations, but also remembering we're not just talking about you personally, it's also the people who aren't in your generation. You'd want them to not have these biases against you, right? So this is just kind of how it works. I also like generational transition as a topic within diversity and inclusion in general. It tends to be a little bit more fun to talk about than some of the other subjects that can be sensitive. And certainly all diversity and inclusion has some sensitivity associated with it, but I don't know, something about talking about generations, people tend to have a little more fun with it. So I encourage you to do that today. Little bit about what do we mean when we talk about a generation. So a generation is defined as about a 15 to 20 year span. And I want to mention it's different than someone's age in that the generational qualities that a person has specific to their generation don't tend to change as they age. So if and we'll talk a lot about these qualities in a little bit, but like the independent Gen Xers, for example, that was true of Gen Xers when they were teenagers, as well as in the workplace. Now, as you can see, most Gen Xers born between 1965 and 1980. And so people of a specific age, if you've studied adult development, also have qualities associated with that age, but generation is really different. It's a quality that we carry with us as we age and transition through different roles at work and in our home lives. So these are the sort of agreed upon generations, and this is not an exact science, and I hope everyone can be okay with that here. You can even see I have some overlap. So this is my definition of the different generations kind of based on my research. I like to think of the baby boomers as born between 1945 and 1964, roughly. It doesn't mean that if you were born on January 1st, 1965, you're automatically part of Gen X. We'll talk a little bit about those sort of transitions in a minute. Most of our workplaces will have these three generations listed here: the baby boomers, Generation X, and Generation Y, which are also called millennials. From here, I'll use the word millennial going forward instead of both. Some workplaces will have the bookend generations: Generation Z, which is the emerging younger generation, and traditionalists, which also are called the greatest generation. And I use the term traditionalist from here forward. So just to do the math for you, baby boomers right now are about age 56 to 75. Gen X about 40 to 55, about 25 to 40. You can see if you're 40, you kind of can take your pick, or maybe you have a little bit of both qualities here. And you'll notice this too if you look at work or articles about generational transition that you might come across. You'll notice that it's not uniform how these are defined. So this is roughly about these ages. And again, when you turn 40, you don't automatically become part of one generation, or the second you turn 25, now you're a millennial and you used to be Gen Z. It doesn't quite work like that. But just generally speaking, these are rough categorizations and ages, and you can kind of start thinking about yourself. Do you identify with the generation identified here for you and the people that you work with? Does this kind of seem like it tracks for you? All right, so we're going to start off now with a couple of polls. So this will help us kind of understand, first of all, who's here. And then we have 10 choices here. You can read through them, and Jody's going to pull up the actual poll in a second. This is not the poll, but this is a preview of the poll. So I give you the option to choose if you might consider yourself both, if you're in those years that we're kind of on the border. So if you fall squarely within one generation, you'll take one of the top 5 choices. And if you kind of are on the border on one of those years where there was some transition, and then also if all of this doesn't make sense yet, that's okay. You can put unsure. So Jody, if you want to go ahead and pull up that poll now, let's leave it open for like 30 seconds to a minute, just depending. You can see how the responses are coming in.
It's live now.
All right, should we give it about 10 more seconds?
Sure. We have some baby boomers, Gen X. Oh, who's coming at the top? Okay. So
all right, can you run through the results for me, just since I can't see it?
Sure. So let's see. Looks like millennials are in the lead, 46.2. And then baby boomer and Gen X, both 23.1. And then both Gen X and millennial, 7.1.
Excellent. Any responses from Gen Z or the traditionalists?
No.
Not, okay, that's all right. That's, this is pretty typical for a workplace makeup. And of course, that's going to be changing every year. There will be more Gen Z participants, and that's the only generation where participation is expected to grow. Interesting. So, oops. So now we have one more poll. This is a little bit about asking about your workplace. So choose the best answer. This is not, again, not an exact science. If you don't see your workplace makeup here, either take the best choice that's closest. For example, if you only have millennials and Gen X, I would say choose number 3. But also I gave you the option to choose the 2 generations, the Jeff Haven style, old people and young people, or us and them. And again, if you still don't, because I haven't really told you much about any of these generations, if you wanted to just kind of reserve judgment or don't want to make a call or don't know, just go ahead and hit unsure.
All right, results are coming in fast and furious.
Nice.
give it a few. Oh, we have quite a few different. They're changing by the second, Ellie. Changing.
We need to give it a little more time.
Okay.
Yeah, once you see it to start to slow down, we'll give a 10-second warning.
Okay. All right, 10-second warning, folks. Okay, I think we're good. Let me get the results. Okay, so we have 50% for the 3 generations in the middle.
Yep.
Got that. 25% for the 4 youngest generations.
Okay.
12.5% for the 4 oldest generations.
These are really neat and tidy percentages here.
And well, here we go. These aren't 6.3% for all 5 generations. And 6.3% for the 2 generations, old people and young people.
Yep. Excellent. Well, that's a great spread. So we've got a lot of diversity here in terms of what our workplaces are like. And also just those of you who have the Gen Z and the traditionalists in your workplace, consider, sharing at the end when we have time, just because we noticed that we don't have any Gen Z or traditionalists that said they're participating today, that identified as participating today. And the half of our workplaces don't include either of those generations. So if any of you that work with those folks have a great story to share and are compelled to, I'd really encourage you to do that at the end when we have some time for that. So I think that it's also worth using some Gen X skepticism here. Why do we care about this? I think that this is also not just about the larger conversation about diversity and inclusion, but specifically generational transition and what does that mean? So my third bullet point here, the capitalist argument for all diversity. Diverse teams are more creative and diverse teams solve problems more accurately. These are evidence-based claims. My sources are below on the bottom, but also I have a short link that I'll share at the end of the presentation. I encourage everybody to read up on that because it's very eye-opening and it kind of helps to stay motivated as to why, when we're faced with some adversity, why pursuing diversity is good for business. In terms of generational transition, this is still true. Mostly this centers around the different communication styles of different generations. Does anyone want to guess what these differences are due largely to? Their relationship to one specific thing? I'll give you a hint if you sort of look at the background of this slide, sort of subtly encouraging you to, this is all about the relationship to technology. So the way that this manifests in the workplace are different communication styles of different generations due largely to their relationship to technology. All workplaces use technology. It's not all the same. One other thing to mention, why do we care about this, is that the Millennial and Gen Z generation are looked to be about 75% of the workforce by 2025. This is a statistic that is often misquoted. Maybe some of you have seen it where it says sometimes you'll see printed, the workplace will be 75% millennial by 2025. That's not true. And it's not possible because all millennials that will ever exist already exist. So how would that, are there that many that aren't working now? It doesn't make any sense if you really think about it. The truth is that those two younger generations are projected to be about 75% of the workforce by 2025. So this means that these younger workers are going to be taking over leadership positions. This is already happening with the millennials. Right now, the millennials make up about 40% of the workforce. And actually, this is the peak. This is the peak, the largest that the percentage that the millennials will ever be is right around now in terms of projections. Obviously, there's a lot of disruption in our workplaces right now, but these percentages are sort of expected to hold. And interestingly, the makeup of this webinar here, 46.2% millennials, not, a little more overrepresentation, but pretty consistent with what's true in workplaces in general. So Jody talked a little bit about my bio. I think, when you say like, what gives you the right to talk to us about this? So this is kind of a little bit about me. I won't go through it again, but just call your attention to the bottom. I've deliberately tried not to talk about my own age, although I do identify as an Xennial. So I'm one of those both millennial and Gen X people. I'm also a wife and mom, originally a Youper, city dweller for most of my adult life, moved here from Chicago in 2015. So I've been here 4 or 5 years. All right, so let's talk about workplaces. Anybody recognize this workplace or this family? If you do, go ahead and type it into the chat or have a little laugh to yourself. Jody, is anybody guessing in the chat who this family is? Anybody shared?
I don't see it yet, but I know.
Yeah, right. So this is the Arnold family. Yep. This is the Arnold family from a show from the 80s, about the 60s, called The Wonder Years. So some folks might remember this because it was one of those period shows. So it was about another time in a current time. It had a little bit more of a broad appeal. This is a family. This is not a workplace, but I bring this up because of the dad's workplace. So Kevin Arnold, who's the main character, his dad went to work. It was a physical place that he went to. So work was a building. He went to the office, and I think the episodes of Kevin being at the office really made an impression on me in terms of like what was the workplace, what did it used to be. You started at an entry-level job and you worked your way up. Management was older, entry-level workers were younger, and you were rewarded for your loyalty and consistency over time. Our modern workplaces are probably not like that. They probably more closely represent the workplaces on this show, which is a show, HBO show called Insecure. It's in its 4th season, so this is a current show. Issa, who's the main character, you can kind of see her on the poster here. She is, at least for the first couple seasons, works at a nonprofit and is in her 20s at a director level role. That would have been unheard of for Kevin Arnold's dad. To be given that much responsibility in their 20s. The other main character, Molly, works in a multi-generational workplace as well, although it's a different way. She works in a law firm. So that spans a huge span of generations with a lot of young people and also a lot of baby boomers or older still continuing to work in the workplace. So the executive director, the boss, which is that sort of middle photo, she is a woman. Again, you didn't see that in Kevin Arnold's workplace. The board of Issa's workplace, her nonprofit, are multi-generational. That's still kind of a newer phenomenon. And then just something worth noting, both of these workplaces kind of have that 40% millennial or appear to be, at least from TV. You never really know like how old the characters are supposed to be exactly. Molly's coworkers at the law firms that she works at appear to be, especially in season 1, appear to be closer to retirement age, maybe more likely to be replaced by younger workers. And Issa's workplace seems like at the nonprofit already seems like it's about 75% millennials and Gen Z. So kind of reaching that a little bit ahead of time, possibly due to the nature of the work that it is. So just a note that your workplace is probably a lot more like the workplaces on Insecure. And so that's another reason why this matters. We're going to talk specifically next about the actual generations and some like how we work together. And that's kind of the most exciting part to get into. But it bears noting the idea of stereotyping versus generalizing. Stereotyping is an action that can be harmful. It's when negative attributes associated with a group, either true or untrue, are applied to an individual or group. Generalizing is when attributes are applied in order to achieve some higher pursuit, such as understanding each other, working together more effectively, or simply for the sake of learning. Generalizations are based on evidence and are not meant to suggest that no individual variation could ever occur. This is a little bit of a disclaimer, but also I encourage everybody to be comfortable generalizing, but keep an open mind. Let's try not to stereotype, and the two are very different. One other thing is that we all have our own sort of survivor's bias based on individuals that we have encountered at work, or maybe even our own selves. So things that have happened to us or things we've experienced, sometimes it's tempting to attribute, and this is where young people these days or old people never, those types of generalizations come from. So if we can all just agree to keep an open mind and recognize that maybe our experience isn't the only possible one, this will get us to that pursuit of something more, the higher order pursuit of learning, working together more effectively and more efficiently. All right, so now we're going to go to 5-Minute University. This is because this is a 40-minute presentation. Experts could talk about working with the different generations for days. There's whole college courses based on each of the generations. And so I'm trying to distill a great deal of knowledge into something that's quickly presented, but also still valuable. So I hope that you'll come along with me on this pursuit in our 5-Minute University. Bonus points if anyone knows what this university landmark is and possibly any of the reasons that I have chose it. So yeah, this is, let's get into it, shall we? All right, so 5-Minute University, let's talk about baby boomers. The summary of the qualities of baby boomers is the value for hard work. And this is something that I think is widely documented and widely discussed, and there's not a lot of disagreement. Also, this perspective that work and fun are separate. You don't have fun at work. Work is something that you do to make the fun parts of your life more attainable. And then also, interestingly, this is the first generation that was celebrated, not tolerated. This is attributed to a book about child rearing that by Dr. Spock. So those in the baby boomer generation, or if you have parents or grandparents in the traditionalist generation, I myself can remember my only recollection of seeing this book was on my grandparents, who were traditionalists, on their shelf. So this was something that rang true to me, kind of learning and researching these different qualities. And I think this celebrated, not tolerated, it's a way that maybe baby boomers and millennials especially could relate to each other more than meets the eye. Baby boomers at work. So one thing that I want to talk about is the fallacy of who's left. And sometimes in this, in the workplace, we generalize what the whole generation is like based on the people we know and work with. Baby boomers have a specific type of bias kind of built in because this is the large generation in leadership roles approaching retirement age, not necessarily approaching retirement, by the way, different things. And in the meantime, that also means that more than other generations, baby boomers who used to participate in work no longer do, either because of making choice to not work for family reasons, or in some cases, the best of the best are the baby boomers who are currently working in leadership roles and contributing in every type of position at workplaces in all different levels. And so no matter who you are, if you're a baby boomer, you've been in the workplace for 30 plus years already, that's an achievement. Even if you've had multiple different jobs, regardless of what type of leadership role you have, you're still working. And so that, I think, is something that it's easy to miss, that there's a lot of baby boomers not present in the workplace and not present in the workplace. But who's left is the best of the best. So that is something that there's a huge benefit to that type of experience for everybody. It's Merrill Lynch, I think, did a study that surveyed baby boomers, and something like 76% plan to continue working past the traditional age of retirement, often in a part-time role or with different types of responsibilities, not necessarily continuing to climb the corporate ladder, but still wanting to contribute, wanting to learn, wanting that human connection, and leveraging their experience more than anything. I love this third picture over on the right, and all my photos are from Creative Commons, licensed and not subject to copyright. So these are not people that I know. But I love that, which is that, it kind of defies that stereotype of, as we get older, we can't use technology. It's absolutely not true. And, this gentleman who appears to be at a trade show using his iPhone to take pictures, probably of someone's screen while they're presenting. Baby boomers are the best at teamwork. So this is something that if you are in a leadership position and you have baby boomers available to lead teams or be part of teams, and the reason they're the best at teams has to do with their participation or being around during the civil rights movement. Baby boomers invented teamwork. This was something that they took from the current events environment in the turbulent 60s and 70s and brought it to the workplace as an ability to, the idea of having teams at work was created by baby boomers. So if this is something, can be a great bridge between different generations, is working at teams and making sure to include baby boomers. The many sides of expertise, this is just baby boomers, because they've been at work longer than other generations, they have relationships, they have institutional knowledge, expertise, all of this is good. This can also lead to a bias that the way things have been done needs to continue, and often this is a source of conflict. Don't ignore your baby boomers when they are resistant. Make sure you take time to talk to them, hear their ideas, listen to them, and then take time to show a new and alternative way. They've always been adaptable. They're just remember that bringing experience means that they've seen it done successfully a different way. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily unable to change. Gen X. So Gen X is tech savvy, but they opt in and out on their terms. And what this means is that they don't necessarily use every type of technology, but that if they want to learn it, they will. And sometimes that's because they want to communicate with younger workers or with their own children. Productive, adaptable, and skeptical. And you'll see this I'm going to put all the bullet points up here so you can kind of read through. If you summarize Gen X in one word, it is independent. So these are professionals who, this generation is a little smaller, and in a way Gen X is responsible for the four generation workplace because it's a smaller time unit, but because their relationship to technology was so different than their parents or the generation ahead of them, and so different from people who were 15 to 10 years younger than them, it really created this necessitation of a smaller, shorter generation because it was just so different, and how it brought these different qualities to the workplace really matters for firms. So these, even though it is a smaller generation, again, just like with baby boomers, don't ignore their needs. The generation, they're changing rapid exposure to technology in their formative education throughout college. It was distinct from the baby boomers and also distinct from millennials, so much more that maybe Gen X still experienced mimeographs, library cards, landlines, these sorts of things, but they still are able to very easily uptake social media. They used email in high school. So this is kind of like a generation with a real specific use of technology. I always say, if you've got Gen X workers, have them rewrite the cumbersome technical manuals or whatever policy manuals. They'll take a 500-page binder and turn it into something that's 15 pages long. They're the best at really taking a skeptical eye and a critical eye. And they are the generation that coined the phrase work-life balance. This was the thing that Gen X wanted and demanded of their workplace. All right, so now let's talk about millennials. This is the largest generation represented on this webinar and also in the workplace. And unlike their parents, they believe that work should be fun. They want to enjoy themselves at work. And something to remember is that their workplaces have only become less stable. So they have seen influences such as the dot-com bubble burst, the September 11th events, the financial crisis, and continuing through to the current health pandemic, creating a ton of instability. It's only become less stable. They've never seen that loyalty is rewarded. As individuals, they need to understand their role within the bigger picture. And this is a real change and a real shift from the baby boomers who would give loyalty in exchange for the stability and security over time. So I want to talk about millennial shaming, which is, there's a lot of different terms for this, but this idea of millennials they won't insert here. So they won't be loyal to one firm. They won't do hard work. And this is absolutely untrue. It's important to remember that this generation watched their parents trade that loyalty for stability, and it did not always pay off. They saw their parents not necessarily have the same security that their grandparents had, pensions disappearing, things like that. And so this is just something to remember, that this is a generation that wants to have fun. They've seen their workplace only become less stable, and that they've seen that the trade-off of loyalty has not always paid off. I also think the definition of loyalty is a little different. Millennials are very commonly emailing with their phones outside of working hours. I mean, how is that not loyalty? So no matter what, these are emerging leaders and the future leaders. This very, very large generation will be taking over leadership positions within every workplace. So I think it's important to kind of recognize that, and instead of trying to force our ideas of the way things used to be, let's work together to make a fun workplace where maybe this type of stability that they've never seen could be something that really creates a sense of purpose and motivation. But this generation will be the next, will be emerging leaders. So a little bit about Gen Z. This will probably be more like a 2-minute university. We talk about them as digital natives. Millennials are not. Millennials had landlines when they were kids, and some of those other non-digital technologies that I mentioned earlier, but real close. The Gen Z folks, so this is age 25 and under right now, we know that they make decisions quickly. And so that's something that, as a management or partnership, teamwork kind of thing to think about. But mostly I'd like to point out this 5th bullet point, many traits yet to emerge. We don't really know. We have some understanding about Gen Z in the sense of who they are as people, but they haven't been in the workplace long enough for us to really understand or have a lot of evidence of how that manifests. We know they're highly connected in social networks. There are some indications of tech dependency. And so this is something to kind of consider for those of you in a leadership role working with Gen Z. I don't want to ignore traditionalists. So I put a couple of traditionalists here. I don't know if anybody knows who these folks are. So these are both professional sports franchise owners. And I know from our polls that we do have some folks here who work with traditionalists. Traditionalists are absolutely present in the workplace still, although I think not quite as much as a generation. It tends to be individuals, and it tends to be people who have a lot of responsibility or a lot of power, or both. There are other arenas where traditionalists, not just sports ownership, but other aspects of the entertainment industry, and I almost don't want to mention politics, although if you think about the leaders in our world, many leaders and people with a lot of responsibility fall into that generation. So I would just encourage us to make sure that we don't ignore them. Since it's not necessarily a generational representation, you tend to have someone in a leadership position, usually with specialized expertise or a specific reason. They're present often in family businesses. I think that it's also okay to just treat your traditionalists like the individuals that they are and ask them what they need. They will tell you. They have a great ability, and this is more consistent with the age group rather than this generation specifically, but over 75, people tend to be really concerned with being healthy, staying safe, and being challenged, and being able to stay connected. And so for some folks, the workplace is the way to do that. They have great knowledge about what they need and what motivates them, and no issues sharing that. All right, so just a little bit about working together. One of the things I hear about a lot is this idea of millennials managing baby boomers, so emerging leaders, and having a baby boomer having that leadership dynamic where the manager is younger. And how do you get through to that point of respect? And one of the reasons I like talking about generational transition is that it's predictable. So unlike other aspects of diversity, there are predictable ways that we can work together. One of them is younger workers who are managing baby boomers, get them what they need and they will respect you. That's it. Capture their wisdom before it's gone. Make sure that that's something, if baby boomers, many are considering retirement, even though many aren't, or sort of partial retirement or some sort of hybrid. And for all of us, this is back to that notion of bias, and this matters because systemic conflict can cost firms in time and money. Intergenerational conflict is something that is a little bit easier to predict. Like I said, it can be woven into team building more easily than some other inclusion initiatives. All right, so we'll try to use the last couple minutes here with Q&A, but I wanted to make sure to be transparent about my sources. Down here at the bottom on the left-hand side, I created some short links if you're interested in that Scott Horton video, the HBR article about cultural diversity. So this is the one that makes that case and provides some evidence about diverse teams, culturally diverse teams being more creative. And then the third one is from Stanford University Business School, which is a long form study, but you can kind of read the executive summary too about the accuracy of problem solving among diverse teams. And this one was with prior familiarity. So it was people, there were two people that knew each other and a new person, and then some of the teams they controlled for that. So it's actually a really interesting study. And these are just a couple of real credible examples, but there's lots more out there. So I created some short links just so that you could jot those down. So that's Scott_Horton_trust, HBR_cultural_div, or accurate_probsolve. They are not case sensitive, but it's just a little easier to read like that. So a little bit, if you want to get in touch, I'd love to keep talking with you about generational transition, but let's hear from you all now if anybody has questions or stories to share.
Thanks, Ellie. I'm watching to see what questions come in. So when I see some folks, if you have questions, you can put those into chat rather than the Q&A so that we can see those. I loved your comment about diverse teams are more creative and more accurate. I thought that was just really insightful. And I was wondering, can you share an example of the generalizing versus stereotyping? Could you share another example of that that might happen in, like,
Sure.
let's say in the workplace?
Yeah. So I think this is, I kind of alluded to this a little bit, but we can talk about it in more detail. So stereotyping is when we look at maybe either something we've read or someone that we've worked with that exemplifies a negative quality, and then we attribute it to everyone like them. So a stereotype in generational transition would be millennials aren't loyal no matter what. They'll change jobs if something better comes along. And so that's a quality that is sort of a negative attribute attributed to an entire generation, possibly based on hearsay or something you've read, or possibly reality, something you've experienced. But so because it's negative and because it's not evidence-based, that is a stereotype. Generalizing might require us to look at it and kind of motivate ourselves from this idea of learning from it. So it's not just saying, well, millennials will always change jobs and they'll never be loyal to you. If we look at it from the perspective of how do we learn about that, or how do we kind of work together based on that being true or not. It's just like, it's a little bit subtle, but it's more about like coming out with a productive result. So
Right.
in this case, in this example, it would be, I know that my millennial workers have a different definition of loyalty than I did as a baby boomer, let's say. So how do I help them? How do I motivate them to want to stay here? Or how do I embrace that and like be okay with people spreading their wings and moving on to another role? What kind of planning can I do as a firm to either embrace those things rather than trying to make it like it's wrong because it isn't what it was like for me?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you for that. I have two questions so far. One is a quick one. Was your photograph of the tower on the campus, was that Yale?
No, it was not. Good guess though.
Oh,
It's
good
out
guess
east
up
somewhere.
there. What's that?
It is, should I just tell you all? So this is the photo from the University of Pittsburgh. This is their signature building called the Cathedral of Learning. I chose it for two reasons. One is the Cathedral of Learning has these actual classrooms designed by different countries. So Lithuania, Sweden, they donated and designed countries of a specific year of what classrooms were like. And that's, students actually go and learn in those different international classrooms. So I love it for diversity presentations because it's just kind of like a little note to that. Also, that's where my husband went to school. I didn't go to Pitt, I went to Northwestern, but it's just like a nice little nod. to
I
him.
love it. I love it. That's great. So we have another question. Any tips for avoiding miscommunication in a digital world between generations, millennial to boomer, for example? How important is quote unquote email attitude in miscommunications?
Oh boy, yeah. So this is a really interesting one, and I don't know exactly if I can't actually tell if the author of the question is coming at it from a boomer perspective or a millennial perspective. So congratulations on that. Well written, as to keep an open mind. And I think that this is an area where we have a lot of temptation to generalize. I know though that I've worked with millennials that were not very good communicating at email, and I've worked with baby boomers who are really skilled at it. The point is to establish some shared boundaries, especially if it's some frequent communication. In a large workplace, this is impossible. You can't work with every individual. Let's say you work at Munson. You can't sit down and have a one-on-one with every single person about their email preferences. But perhaps with the teams that you work with most frequently, it's worth it to establish some norms. And I think, baby boomers are the best at teams. Put them in charge of putting a representative team together, talk about it, come up with some ideas across generations. You might be surprised, or at least that would be a good starting point. I will promise you that waiting for it to work itself out will not work. Hoping that by setting a good example, someone will kind of come around to the way that there's just too many options out there. Even in my old workplace, we had people use Macmail, people use Gmail platform for their work email, people use Outlook, and even just those types, like the interface that you use will shape kind of how you use that medium. And you don't even know that when it comes across. Sometimes people typing from their phone will have a completely different tone of voice than when they're sitting. So there's just too many choices and too many things that impact it. But if we can kind of come to a shared understanding, so I would say, like, leverage what everybody's good at. Get a good skeptical Gen Xer in there to make sure that you're looking at the different types. And then also the millennials as part of this team, just make sure that they know that this team is part of where it fits in the bigger picture. And I think you'll be surprised at the type of magic that could happen from a 3-generation team like that, pursuing a specific problem like this.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I have one more question, and we have to keep the answer really short because we're a couple minutes over. But the question is, there seems to be the perception from some older workers / employers / management that younger generations are driven solely by money or salary. How do we reconcile that in Traverse City, for example, where cost of living is exceedingly high compared with surrounding communities?
So this
That's
has
a
to be a
long,
short answer.
I know, I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I think that some of the resources out there, and even, this is like probably not super evidence-based, but I would start, if you're really interested in this, Googling and see what you come up with. Be skeptical about your sources. Look at credible sources like HBR is a good one. But kind of type some of these problems in. And the root of what I'm trying to get at is that all of the generations, and you asked specifically about the younger generation, so I think we're talking about Gen Z and millennials, there is definitely a desire to take home more than a paycheck. So for millennials, one of those things is transparency. So I mean, in some cases it's not possible, but if you can be transparent with how allocations are made and decisions are made as to allocating internal resources, try to have some fun with it. Openness is another one. I was part of a project where we were in a crisis response, and it was after making an unpopular decision. Our leadership was really getting attacked from our community. And the decision that we made as we published a response to it and the new policies, we were by nature like kind of on the defensive. And we created, and this is sort of like forcing my like generational transition norms into this group, was this idea that we would share the progress of the new policy as we wrote it. So every couple of weeks we did a webinar and said, anybody that wants to read the next draft, and it wasn't even done yet. And of course, if there's legal implications, this is not possible, but in lots of cases, there's not. We're afraid of it, and we're afraid of what's going to happen. And believe me, I was too, but we shared the work in progress, the sort of half-baked policy, to people who were already mad at us. And the response was amazing. A lot of people wrote nothing. I hope they read it. A lot of people wrote back with constructive feedback, but there was this idea of being part of it, as you know, before something was finalized, that really spoke to that millennial generation. So again, this is kind of like that transparency and openness. Um, I don't know how far that would go in terms of attracting and retaining talent. I mean, I think that's a bigger issue that we are working on, definitely in the Traverse Connect Diversity and Inclusion Committee. That's kind of the number one thing that we're wrestling with. Like, how do we get diverse talent to want to and be able to live in Traverse City? You know, I mean, and I
Yeah,
think keep asking those questions, keep driving.
absolutely. And our Creative Coast initiative, same thing, working on that talent attraction. So thank you for that. I know that was really rushed. I'm sorry, but that was terrific. And so we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you again, Ellie, for joining us today. We greatly appreciate your time and sharing such valuable information. We would also like to thank once again Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan for making this event possible. We hope that you all enjoyed the learning stage and encourage you to check out future learning stage webinars in addition to the other features in our virtual expo today. Thank you for attending, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hope to see you at our next webinar.